Alright, so I want you to go over a couple things. First is the Blackboard. I'm not sure if you've seen that. There is an announcement about tutoring. So if you go under course information on Blackboard, you'll see there is tutoring available. So the accounting tutoring program at Rutgers Business School at Newark. Okay, it's available to any student enrolled. So you can make an appointment and come at any time. Yes?
It's really too dark to see.
It's going to be there in a second. It's coming up. Okay, so right here under your course information, you have this accounting tutoring program. So once you click, you are in this online scheduling system. And speaking of, tutoring and such, I'm going to move my hours from Monday to Thursday because Monday is not convenient for a lot of students. So it's going to be Wednesday and Thursday, and Monday I have a meeting that comes up like every other week. So I can't have you relying on those hours, okay? So it's going to be Wednesday and Thursday. Right after the lecture when you're about to do homework, I'm there, okay? And it's going to be instead of 2 hours, I think it's 3 hours total. Okay, so you go here, you select your class, you select blah blah blah, and you'll figure it out. There's plenty of information. So use the link, you register, and then I guess you get more information further on. Okay, so another thing that I wanted to point out, I see that many of you have your lab expiring, so make sure you follow through and get the joint account, okay? Because if you create an absolutely new one, it's going to be a problem with the grading. So make sure when you're doing it, you follow. There is a link on my lab. I think it's like 30% of the class who is about to expire or just expired. Okay, so use this instructor course ID. That's here. That's the one that you've talked about. Yeah, use that. Okay, that's on your again. That's on the Blackboard. And then I just told you I'm gonna move this instead of Monday 11 to 12:30. Not all of you are here at this time because we have a class at 2:30. So I'm gonna move that to Thursday. Okay? So at the end of the chapter, yes. Monday hours to Thursday. Do you understand? So instead of Monday, it's going to be Thursday. Because on Monday, none of you have any questions. Okay? What's the question? Office hours. It's not a class. It's just office hours. Yeah. I'm talking only about office hours. Okay, so let's start. Please sign in. Yeah, we have an attendance sheet going through the room. All right, so I'm going to be here and not there. Because, okay. So we finished doing this particular problem, right? So we finished with tick outdoor furniture, correct? Yeah? Alright, so let's do 2 more and then we'll start with the new objective because I want to go over those problems because you'll see them. Okay, so we're going to be allocating overhead right now. It's tough to remember it a week ago, right? But I'll help you along the way. So we have job 303 that includes direct material cost of $500 and direct labor cost of $430. So let's try this. If the manufacturing overhead allocation rate is 80% of direct labor cost, what is the total cost assigned to job 303? So let's look allocation rate. How did we calculate that? We have our we need to have our direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead calculated, right? So my manufacturing overhead allocation rate is 80%. Now take 2 minutes, try to revive your memory and see if you can calculate this, okay? So my total cost is going to consist of 3 components, right? Direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. So I do have 2 of them. I just need a third one. Yes? Yeah? Almost? Try again. Yes.
We're looking for the, so don't you do the labor cost times 80% to get the manufacturing?
So you have your direct materials of 500, right? You have your direct labor of 430, and now you need to find your manufacturing overhead.
80% of 430 for your manufacturing overhead?
So how much are you getting? Yes.
1,270.
1,274? Okay. Anyone else?
344.
344 for what? Total? So you're calculating, what did you do? How did you get that number?
1274.
How did you get 344?
The 435.80.
Uh-huh. And what did you get?
344.
But what is it?
That's your manufacturing overhead.
That's right. So it's only your manufacturing overhead. Now the question is total cost assigned to job 303.
1274.
So you got it right. 1274. Okay? So you should have something like this. Yeah? Okay. Okay. So let's try to do this. We've seen something like that, right? We want to compare actual to allocated overhead. So Seattle Enterprises produces LCD touchscreen products. The company reports the following information in December 31st, 2012. And what we want to do, we want to answer 4 questions. Yeah? So first, what is the actual manufacturing overhead of Seattle Enterprise? Okay, then allocated manufacturing overhead, and is manufacturing overhead under or over allocated, and by how much? So let's see. Our actual manufacturing overhead of Seattle Enterprise. How do we calculate that? It shouldn't take you more than a couple minutes. Try that. For those who just came, please sign the sign-in sheet. And once you're done, can you pass it over here? So anyone on actual manufacturing overhead? So what am I going to look at when I'm trying to calculate actual manufacturing overhead? Is it materials inventory? No. Work in process inventory?
No.
Okay, finished goods? I'm looking for actual manufacturing overhead. Okay, any numbers around? Yeah?
50.
I got 51,900.
51,900.
How did you get 51,900?
Adding the website and the manufacturing overhead to the account.
Okay. Any other numbers?
Isn't that So it's over allocated.
Okay, what is allocated manufacturing overhead? How much?
53.
Where did we get 53,900? Of the manufacturing overhead? Okay. And then, is it over allocated then or under?
Over.
Why is it over?
Because it's bigger than the actual allocation
Okay.
by,
So my allocated manufacturing overhead is higher, right? The number is higher than the actual. All right, and by how much? 2,000. It makes sense to everyone? Do you have any questions? Cool.
so that would be allocated with.
Okay. So that should be your answers. Yeah.
For manufacturing overhead, when we say the actual, is there a reason why we put it on the left side? Or could we put it a debit, like a normal debit account?
Okay, so you have your, do you remember how we discussed, let me go back to the slide. Just a second. Do you remember this? So your actual overhead cost, right, is going to be on your left, and it's going to sum up to your indirect materials, indirect labor, blah, 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 to the actual overhead cost, right? Now you're going to have a balance. Balance is what differs. If your balance is on the right, what does it mean? It means you allocated more than your actual overhead, right? If it's on the left, it means your actual is higher than allocate. So this is the difference. You need to see where your balance, where you're writing your balance, right? But your allocated is going to be on your right, and your actual is going to be on the left because of how you're going to record your overhead. Yeah? I think there is more on that in the book. Should be more. Okay. If it's not clear, we're going to go again and again over this. So ask me questions if it's still not clear. All right. So let me switch to, we're going to go over a new objective. It's number 4. I'm spending more time on this chapter because it's more complicated than others. Okay? So the 4th learning objective is going to be to record completion and sales of finished goods and the adjustment of under or over allocated overhead. So we'll go over this again right now. Okay. So we know how to accumulate and how to assign the cost of direct materials, right? Same goes for direct labor, and now we're learning for overhead to jobs, correct? So we're going to be assigning all of these 3 to a certain job. And to complete this process, we need to do the following. We need to account for the completion and sale of finished goods, and we need to adjust manufacturing overhead at the end of the period. Okay, so we'll learn how to do both. Okay, so when the job is completed, we need to make some records, right? So we need to write down that the job is completed, that this is the cost of good job that's transferred it from what? From work in process to finished goods, and then from finished goods to cost of goods sold. Okay? Alright, so let's see how it's done. What is our journal entry? When we are going to be putting the journal entry from work in process to finished goods, what are we going to do? We're going to debit the finished good inventory, right? And then work in process is going to be credited. That's clear, right? Now, what's going to happen next? We're going to have some finished goods that are going to be moved to cost of goods sold, right? So the job is sold. We need 2 entries, correct? The first one is going to be debit to accounts receivable and credit to sales revenue. Okay, and then cost of goods sold to finished goods inventory. Okay. So now we have a bunch of T accounts here. Thank you so much.
Can you go back as far as it?
Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When I was doing the homework on my lab, and I had a question about the housing and how one house got sold for $200,000. If it doesn't state that it was sold for cash, are you automatically assuming that it was sold on account, or money was received on account? Because all it said that the house was sold for $200,000. I initially put in that it was received cash, and then it said it was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And then accounts receivable. So unless it states received cash of blah blah blah, it's going to be known as accounts receivable.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I guess it's more a question to a publisher why they did not specify it, but I see what you're saying. Didn't have anyone asking that question.
I didn't know if that was.
So they give you an option of both, right? And you selected the cash and it said, what?
Usually, when they don't say cash, you know exactly, like.
It should be account.
On account.
I do agree with you, but this is an introductory course, and I think it should state. I see what happened.
I think the attendance sheet.
Huh?
I didn't sign it. I didn't get the attendance sheet. So you can provide me with some.
Sure. Okay. All right. So, do you need me to go over this again? Are we done with this slide? Okay. So now we have some T accounts that we want to go over, right? So we're going to be accounting for finished goods. Let's see. So we have these T accounts, and they're going to show us how this cost is flowing throughout the accounts. So once the job is completed, let me move this. So once the job is completed, the amount is transferred to work in process, right? So we're right here. Now when the job is completed, so we're going from work in process to finished goods inventory, and when the job is sold, we transfer that cost to cost of goods sold. Okay. Okay. Now, what I wanted to point out here is it's so inconvenient. I'm used to this. So, what I wanted to point out, do you see this balance of 27,000? Yeah. So this is your work in process inventory. That's a job that's started but have not been completed. Okay. So your T account tells you a story, and then what happens here? What is this 50,000 balance? That's your job is completed but didn't get sold.
Most goods available to sell.
Yeah, it didn't get sold. Okay, make sure this is signed. All right. Okay, so now we're adjusting our manufacturing overhead, right? We've seen that. Do you remember we just went over this 54,000 balance, 5,400 balance, right? So we said that if the balance is on the left side, then our actual overhead cost is higher than allocated. Then what happened? So we under allocated. Okay? So why something like this can happen? Because we use the predetermined amounts, right? So sometimes we can be off. So when we are adjusting, our adjustment should in our case, increase or decrease cost of goods sold? What do you think? Increased cost of goods sold, right? So our manufacturing overhead allocated is work in process inventory, right? It's right here. And we have a difference of 5,400. Now we need to adjust. So let's see. Let's see what we're going to do. So we need to close the manufacturing overhead. Okay? So when accountants adjust our under-allocated or over-allocated overhead at the end of the period, they're doing a couple of manipulations. So if it's under-allocated, we're going to debit cost of goods sold, credit manufacturing overhead, okay? And that's going to increase cost of goods sold for under unallocated amount. So in our case, what did we do? You remember this? 5,400? So that's 5,400 right here, closed. Okay? And that brings manufacturing overhead to 0. So do you think the picture is different for over allocated? It is, right? So let's look what happens here. We're going to debit our manufacturing overhead. Okay, so it's going to go right here. And then credit cost of goods sold. It would be right here. Okay, so let me go back. Do you see this? Right? So when I have to close, I'm going to do what? I'm going to put my closed, right? Entry 11 on the right. Okay, so it's going to go right here. Okay? A bigger picture for you. Okay. So now let's try on the exercise. We need to compute the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate per direct labor hour, the labor dollar, sorry. That's the first. So we have selected cost data for a company, and it's as follows. So we have our estimated manufacturing overhead cost for the year. We have estimated direct labor, and then we have the same for actual. So now what we want to do, we want to calculate the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate per direct labor dollar. So what are you going to do? You're going to work with estimated numbers, right? It's a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. And because it's per direct labor dollar, it should tell you that you're going to be dividing something by direct labor cost. Okay? So try this. So I'm going to take my estimated manufacturing overhead cost, and I'll divide it by estimated direct labor cost. Right? What am I going to find? It's a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. Tried? Okay? So it's going to be 115,000 over 71,875. How many percent is that? Okay. So next, let's try this journal entry to allocate overhead cost for the year. Okay. So you'll need to debit something and to credit something. Work in process inventory, okay. Am I gonna debit or credit that?
Then
I'm gonna debit it. And then I'll credit manufacturing overhead.
How do you do this? How do you know
What?
how do you know to debit the work in process and credit the manufacturing overhead?
Right?
Is it 'cause it's
We're dealing with two accounts. Manufacturing overhead and work in process. Yeah? So when we are adjusting, where again?
Okay, I got it now.
Yeah? Hold on. Right here. So to allocate overhead cost, we're going to be again dealing with work in process inventory and manufacturing overhead. Make sense?
Wait, to get the number down there, did you take the actual manufacturing overhead and then times it by the 160%?
Oh, I should have asked you that. That's right. I just showed you the number.
Is
Oops.
that how you do it? You take the actual manufacturing and then times it by the 160 by the predetermined manufacturing.
So tell me how I would get this number.
actual direct labor cost multiplied by the percentage. Allocation percentage.
So you are taking you're dealing with actual numbers right now, right?
Yes.
Okay. So how do I get 116,800?
Taking the direct labor cost.
So because it's your predetermined manufacturing overhead rate per direct labor dollar, right? You're going to take your actual direct labor cost for the year. That's right? Yeah? And you'll multiply that by the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. So what did we do here? We're taking this actual direct labor cost for the year, 73,000, right? And we multiplied by 160%. Okay? Now the continuation. That's not the end. So let's try to, using a T account to determine the amount of underallocated or overallocated manufacturing overhead. So we're going to use that 116,800, right? And we'll use our either actual or estimated manufacturing overhead cost for the year. So you decide which one. So we'll debit something and we'll credit something on the manufacturing overhead account.
You're going to debit 119,000 and credit 1,600.
So you're going to debit 119,000 and credit 116,800?
Yeah,
Why? Why not the other way around?
because the 116,800 is your allocated cost,
It's allocated, so it goes to the right. Yeah? Okay.
which is why it's credited.
That's correct.
The actual is to the left for debit, and then that's the difference, and you'll have a balance of underallocated 2,200.
200. That's right. So yours is underallocated by 2,200. Which side am I going to put that on?
Left side?
On the left?
Yeah.
All right. So you got that. Do you have a question how we arrived to these numbers? Okay, and then we calculated the balance. Yeah? And we're going to put it on this side, right? Can you see my mouse? Right here. Okay, so next let's prepare the journal entry to close the balance of the manufacturing overhead account. So again, what accounts am I going to deal with?
Work in progress.
Yeah, work in process and then overhead.
Why work in process?
Um,
I'm closing the balance.
Cost of goods sold, manufacturing overhead.
oh, cost of goods sold. So man overhead and then cost of goods sold.
Right?
Oh, because under allocated.
So cost of goods sold and manufacturing overhead, we got that right. What numbers am I going to use? 2,200 for what? For manufacturing overhead?
For both.
For both. Okay. So I'm going to use this amount that I found here, right? Under allocated by 2,200. And I'm going to apply that to two accounts. One is my cost of goods sold and the other one is manufacturing overhead. So because it's under allocated by 2,200, I'm going to debit my cost of goods sold and I will credit my manufacturing overhead. Right? Because it's under allocated, I will credit my manufacturing overhead. Okay. Do you have any questions? Alright, so next, let's calculate unit cost for a service company. Now, do you remember the difference from service company, how service company is different from any other? We don't have any inventory, right? Okay. So what costs do we have? We have all our costs are non-inventoriable, right? Costs. But at the same time, managers do need to know the cost of different jobs so that we price those jobs correctly, so that at the end of the period we do not find ourselves losing money. Okay? Yeah. Okay. So let's say it's a low company, okay? And we want to consider each client as a separate job. Okay, so not only we need to know the cost of jobs to set the prices, we also want to track and have an accounting for each job, right? Okay, so most significant cost is going to be what? If I'm a low company, it's going to be my labor, right? So labor, in my case, it's an attorney time spent on each case, okay, on each customer, to be precise. We said that each customer is a separate job. So how do we trace that labor to individual jobs?
Cost allocation.
Okay. We have, so we have, as a step one, we compute the predetermined indirect cost allocation rate. And then as a step two, we allocate indirect cost to job by multiplying the predetermined indirect cost allocation rate, right? Step one, by the actual quantity of the allocation base used by each job. So for me, it's important for that law firm, it's important to have this cost of job 19, right? I need to know this number. This is going to let me do this. Then I'll add the standard markup, okay, whatever is my fee, and then that's going to be my sale price. Okay. So now let's look at assigning labor cost to service jobs. What do we deal with? sometimes we have each and every worker filling out the timesheet, and this way we're going to trace our labor. Yeah, that's one of the ways. And then that if it's done online, and usually it is right now done online, we can sum it up and have a report printed out for each job, and this way we can track the hours spent. So let me, okay. So let's see. We're gonna, once the costs are computed, we can set our price. So we just dealt with the predetermined costs, right? So this is very similar. Our predetermined indirect cost allocation rate is expected indirect costs, right? In our case, it's 300,000 divided by expected direct labor hours, right? 10,000. So we expect to spend on that case 10,000 hours, and that's how we're going to find that $30 is our is what we're going to spend per direct labor hour. Okay. Okay. So next we can find our total costs. How we're going to do that? We'll sum up our direct and indirect costs. Okay, so we know that our direct labor is going to take 14 hours, it's $50 per hour, and this is how we're going to find that it's $700. And our indirect cost is, we're going to use predetermined indirect cost allocation rate. We'll multiply it by 14 hours, right? And that's going to be 420, and then we sum it up, and we have our total costs. Okay. Makes sense?
I have a question.
Yes.
The $50, the $700 is the actual, or the actual, and the 420 is the allocated?
No, let's not call it this way. One is your direct labor and one is your indirect, right? So let me give you an example. So let's look at the example. We're gonna have, are we gonna have that there? We will later on. So ask me that question, okay, if you don't get the answer. I wouldn't label it that way. Okay, so let's look. We have this job order costing in the service company. Okay. So Roth Accounting pays Jacqueline Sawyer $104,400 per year, and Sawyer works 1,800 hours per year. Okay, so let's try to calculate what is the hourly cost to Roth Accounting of employing Sawyer. What am I going to do here? Okay. So this is pretty simple, right? We're going to take our 104,400 and divide by 1,800. So our hourly cost is $58. And the next, what direct labor cost would be traced to client 507 if Sawyer worked 12 hours to prepare client 507 financial statement. So I just found that my hourly cost of employing Sawyer is $58. Now I need to find how much of the direct labor cost, I would be tracing to client 507 if Sawyer spent 12 hours working on it. Yeah? What am I going to do?
15 is direct labor.
So 12 times 50.
So I'm going to use my hourly cost, right? 58, and I'll multiply by 12. Okay, so this is clear, right? Yeah? Okay. So now let's look, how do we allocate costs using a processing costing system? And it's weighted average method. You have this appendix A that goes into details. Okay? Alright. So some companies use job order costing to determine the cost of their custom goods and services, right? And we looked at companies like Crayola, right? Shell Oil, it's all the same, one after another. Such companies use processes, right? It goes from making walks, then printing paper, right? Going after wrapping it around each crayon and then packing it. So there is a process. And we're making large quantities of similar product, okay? So such companies, the same product, very large quantities. Same, one crayon is the same as the other, 1 gallon of your gas is the same as the other, okay? Alright, so in this case we're going to be using process costing system. So we're going to have two methods to use this process costing. One is going to be weighted average and the other one is going to be FIFO. Right now let's just talk about weighted average. Okay, so what is it? Process costing. We have costs that accumulate in each manufacturing process that we need to move from one process to another, right? What the company does next, they assign this cost to products passing through each and every step of that production. And then some of those costs, some of the costs that we've been accumulating from one process to another are going to be determining the end of the, at the end, the cost per unit. Okay, so let's look at this colorful illustration. So we have job costing here, and it's an example is of a Dell computer. So remember that our cost information is gathered by the job. Okay. So we have our direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing overhead in the beginning, right? And what do we know? We know that it's in part summed from job 100, job 101, and then 102. And then that cost is going to be transferred to finished goods and then later on to cost of goods sold. Okay? So once the job is completed and all costs are added on that job cost record, what are we going to do? We're going to determine the cost of the job for each unit. Okay? So here is in a little bit more detail. So you have materials inventory, right? I'm going to transfer some of that cost into work in process inventory. Same goes for wages payable. I'm going to transfer that cost to work in process inventory. And then manufacturing overhead. I'm going to do the same, work in process inventory. So once I have to move that cost to my finished goods inventory, what am I going to do? I'm going to move this cost, right? By doing what? I'm going to write the exact amount that I have on the left. The same should be here on the right? So I'm going to move that cost from work in process inventory to finished goods inventory, and the same story is for cost of goods sold. Okay? Yes?
Is the The credit on work in process inventory is the sum of the debits?
In work in process,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily, correct? So if I have something that's still at the end, if I have a balance, what is it going to mean? It's going to mean that some of that is still in process, right? So at the end of the period, I'm going to have something that I'm still working on, correct? But if I have a portion that's moved to finished goods inventory, it means with this amount, I'm done in work in process, okay? And the same story goes here. If I have a balance in finished goods inventory, it means that I have not sold all of it. Yeah? Okay. So let's look at this. So in process costing, this looks just a tad different, right? So again, we have our direct material, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. Hold on. Job order costing, you see how it looks, right? Process costing. A little different. All units go through the same thing, right? That's Crayola. You remember this example? Dell Computer, right? Crayola. It's the same crayon, same walks, just coloring is different. So all units go through the same production process, and so we have the same unit cost. So how are we going to deal with this? So each process is going to use a separate work in process inventory account. So let's look. We have mixing process, molding process, packaging process, right? So my work in process inventory for mixing, right? This is just for mixing. It's going to have a certain materials inventory here, some of the wages payable, and some of the manufacturing overhead. Okay, so do you see the difference? Right? My job order costing, here I had one work in process inventory. Now for my process costing, I have one inventory, work in process inventory for mixing, for molding, for packaging, right? And only then I have finished goods inventory, and that's a that's after I'm done with my packaging, okay? So I have to go through all my steps of the process and then arrive to the finished goods inventory. Okay? Okay. Okay, so let's try to sum this up, understand a little better. We have process costing. Okay, we'll go back to process costing. You remember that we have two main categories. We have our direct materials and we have our conversion costs. That's two main building blocks. Okay?
Conversion costs overhead.
Yeah? Some of it. Okay? So, look at this. So, you're saying it's conversion cost and overhead, right? So, what is my conversion head? Many companies that use process costing are highly automated. So, my direct labor is going to be almost negligible. Yeah? So, somewhat my conversion cost is a manufacturing overhead. Okay, so my conversion cost is going to consist of direct labor and manufacturing overhead. My direct labor is very negligible. I'm going to do this just for simplifying the accounting for the process costing. Again, because the direct labor is negligible, so I'm just going to, it's not negligible, almost. So I'm just going to call it conversion costs. Okay? And again, the name conversion cost we have because we have raw materials in the end and then the finished product at the, raw materials in the beginning, finished goods at the end. Okay? Okay. Now we have a new term here. We have to understand what is equivalent unit. Okay? We have equivalent units so that we can measure our partially finished goods. We already heard something like that before, yeah, in previous classes. Okay, so we're going to be using equivalent units to allow us to measure what is an equivalent of those units that are not finished in finished units. Okay, so it's an equivalent. Okay, those units are not done. We're just trying to estimate what would be the equivalent of finished to finished. Okay? Okay, so what am I going to do? I'm going to take number of partially completed units. I will multiply it by percentage of process completed. And then I'm going to get this number of equivalent units. So how do I know this percentage of process completed? Let me show it to you here. So if I'm done, we're going to call this 100%. Okay, this process, our process is 100%. So if I have my if I have some portion of it not done, right, I'm going to estimate how much have I completed of that process from molding, from mixing components for my crayon, right, to the very end when my goods are finished. So I will estimate that what percentage am I. Okay, so if I'm at packaging process, let's say I estimated it at 80%. Okay, so I'm going to say I have 10,000 balance, right? So right here I'm going to have my balance at packaging process of 10,000, and I'm going to say when I have packaging process balance, it's 80% completed. So what am I going to do for this packaging process? I'm going to multiply 10,000 by 80%, and I'm going to say, okay, so equivalent units I have 8,000. Okay? So why do I need this? Why would I be calculating equivalent units? Still not quite clear, right? Here's the reason why. Because at the end, I want to account for all labor hours and for all materials that I've used. Okay? I don't want only to estimate to only account for finished completely goods. Something is always going to be a balance here, a balance there. It's not a complete accounting if I'm going to just let it hang there at one account and second account. I want to estimate, so how many units am I going to be able to sell? Okay? So that's why I need to calculate my equivalent units. Okay, another important point, sorry about that. My materials may have different percentage completion than the conversion cost. Okay, we'll see that in the example. Okay. So let me show you this on the example. Why am I saying that direct materials, the materials may have different percentage completed than conversion cost? Why is that so? Sometimes my direct materials are added at a specific point, a different point in the process, right? So you see my, I'm going to start with my wax, right? I have 10,000 equivalent units of wax, okay? If I have only 80% completed, I'm going to calculate it to 8,000 equivalent units of conversion cost. And this is 10,000 equivalent units because I'm at 100 completed. I packaged my crayons, I'm done. Okay, so I have 10,000 equivalent units of walks. This is my direct material, right? So I calculate for my direct material, I was able to calculate how many equivalent units do I have. Okay, so at 100% complete, I know it's 10,000. Okay, so my walks was added at the very beginning, and to 100% to the packaging, right? That's my packaging process. I have 100% completed. Okay. So conversion costs and direct materials may be calculated at a different time. Okay. So let's say, let me give you this, just to think about it. If my direct material, some form of packaging, right? Once the process completed, can I say that I have a certain number of completion, a certain percentage of completion? If I'm using a packaging, right? Trying to make it, so I'm boxing my Crayola pencils. I can't say that that direct material is 80% complete if I'm right here at the packaging, right? So whatever pencils I put in that box, right? Whatever boxes I've used, I'm done. Yeah, it's always 100%. Okay, so make sure you understand what direct material you're dealing with before you're trying to calculate the unit, the equivalent unit. Okay? So this. What are my steps of process costing? First, I have to summarize the flow of physical units. I have to compute the output in equivalent units. Then I'm going to compute the cost per equivalent unit. Done that as well, right? And then I will assign cost to completed and ended inventory units. Okay, so let's look at the example. Again, we're still talking about process costing. So let's look. We have these two departments. We have no beginning inventory, or do we? In the assembly department we have 0, right? Okay. We're going to add some materials at the beginning of the process, and conversion costs we're going to be adding throughout the process, right? Do you see conversion costs? Beginning work in process, conversion cost. And then we have conversion costs here, direct labor, manufacturing overhead, and then we calculate the total conversion costs. So during the period, we started with 50,000 units, right? So we can calculate what costs we incurred for that 15,000 units. Now, I started my process, I started in production 50,000. How many did I end up with at the end?
10,000.
I have 10,000 because I transferred out in July 40,000 units, right? Okay, so we're still on this top portion. So 10,000, what happened to 10,000? They remained in the process. Okay?
25% of them are complete.
I'm sorry?
25% of that 10,000 is considered complete.
Mm-hmm. Work in process.
Then you add that to starting department?
Yeah, we can calculate that, right? Okay. So let's look in a little bit more detail. So step 1, right? We just said that step 1 was to summarize the flow of physical units. Okay, so units to account for, what does it mean? It's going to include all the numbers of those units that are still in process at the beginning, right? At the very beginning of the work in process. So for us, it's June 30th. Okay? So we had no, in this example, we had no beginning units. It's 0 for us, right? And then 50,000 we started in production during July. Okay, what is the step 2? We're saying it's compute output in terms of equivalent units. You understand, right? I'm going step by step what we're doing, the process. Here you go. So our step 2, compute output the terms of equivalent units. With this, we show what happened to the units in process during that period. So what do we have here? A number of units completed and transferred out, right? But that's not it. Plus number of partially completed units. Okay. So out of that 50,000, we have 40,000 that are completed and transferred out. And the remaining 10 are only partially completed as of July 31st. Okay, so this is a little example where we have what? We have materials that we are adding at the very end of the process. Right? We had physical flow, beginning work in process 0. Then we adding some materials. Okay? So 25% we just saw, right, of the goods are complete. So what is going to be our ending inventory? Hold on. It's 10,000 by 25%, right? We just calculated it on the other page. I don't know how to move this thing. Okay, so let's look. Here you go. Yeah, you can see it right here. So our conversion, do you see here? So we have 10,000 multiplied by 25%. We have 2,500. Now what are we going to do? We have completed and transferred out during July 40,000. So our conversion cost is 40,000, right? We were done with it. And now we're going to add this 2,500. So our conversion cost at the end is 42,500. Now I moved it back to step 1 so that we can see this conversion cost calculation. Okay? That's the only reason. We're still on step 2 here. Okay. So let's zoom in a little bit to the step 3 and step 4. So what are we doing for step 3? We're computing the equivalent cost per unit. Okay? So we want to take our cost of direct materials and divide by the equivalent units. What is it going to give us? Where do you see where am I calculating this? Can you tell me? There are some letters. I hope you see them. So what am I doing? How do I find my materials cost per equivalent unit? It's this, direct materials, right? So what do I have here? I'm taking my cost of direct materials and divide by the equivalent units, right? So 140,000 divided by 50,000 and I get $2.80. Who's not lost?
Where'd you get the 140,000?
Okay. So that's my direct material, right? I have nothing transferred in. That's a cost dated during the July. Okay? Can I see it here? Hold on. Oh, I can see it here. Cost dated during July, my direct materials. Okay? We had beginning work in process. Do you remember how it was a 0? Yeah? So my total cost is 140,000. And then I calculated my total equivalent units. You remember? Units to account for 50,000. Sorry, 50,000. Right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take 140,000 and divide by 50,000. This is how I'm getting my cost per equivalent unit for direct materials. Now we said there are two parts, direct materials and conversion costs. So same for my conversion costs. I had the 0 in the beginning, right? Now I have a total is what? My beginning work in process for conversion costs and then costs added. So I have 68,000 total. Right? And then I'm going to divide it by 42,500. Why do I have 42,500? That's my conversion cost, right? I calculated that conversion cost. You remember? Mm-hmm. Okay, again, asking who's not lost. You're good? Yeah? Huh? 17. That's why I'm spending time on it, because there are many calculations. We'll start 18. Yes.
Where did you get 68,000 from?
That's my conversion cost, right? Cost added during the July. That's given to you. Okay, and then I calculate my total costs. My total cost is what? Is the summation of direct and conversion. Okay, so let's finish with this slide.
So in a test format, how should we write this out?
Let's do homework first, and then once we have the review, we'll see how we're going to do it on the exam. Okay? Alright, so the last step. 5 more minutes, we're going to be done with the chapter and the quick quiz. Okay? So for my conversion costs, direct labor and overhead costs are added together and divided. So same story, right? By the equivalent units for conversion costs. So this is how we calculated it. Just went over this. So let's look at the step 4, the last one, when we're assigning the period cost to the units. So for 40,000 units that we're transferring out, what we're going to do, we'll multiply them. We're going to use our materials and labor cost per unit, right? So here we're going to take 40,000 multiplied by 280, and then ending work in process 10,000 by 280. Okay? To calculate this total cost. And then the same is true. Do you see how this is a part of the bigger picture right here, right? That's our assigning costs. That's what we're doing here. Okay? So it allows us to calculate total cost that we're accounting for, 208,000. So ending inventory we need to split between the materials and conversion because they are added at the different time, right? And we're using different rates. Okay? Journal entries, favorite part, right? So what are we doing here? We're gonna debit work in process inventory for those costs that are placed in production, and then we'll credit materials inventory, wages payable, manufacturing overhead. Okay? And then for 40,000, what are we going to do? We're going to debit work in process inventory for our first. We're going to cut something, right? For the first process, and then work in process for the second, once we're transferring cost from one process to another. Okay? Let me see. Okay, 2 slides. Bear with me. So here, just notice how the ending balance in work in process for our department 1, how T account looks like. Okay, so we have this total cost of ending inventory here. So how we are transferring? We have direct material, direct labor, manufacturing overhead, our beginning balance is 0, right? So when we're transferring to the other process, it's going to be on the right side. Okay? Our process is still continuing from one to another. Okay, so how is it traveling? So cutting process 1, right? We just figured this out. Now that's from assembly, right? We're transferring this cost to cutting. Okay? And then it's finished goods. We're done with all process. We're done here. Cutting was the last one. Now we're going to transfer it to finished goods inventory. Congratulations. We're done with chapter 17. A much worse one is coming, but it's shorter. So here you go.